On September the 14th, 2015, 25-year-old Jack Taylor was found dead in the graveyard of St Margaret's Church in East London. Jack's devastated family immediately suspected he had been murdered.
Both said to each other that if that's where Jack's been found, someone's put him there. Because Jack would never go and sit anywhere like that. He's not like that.
And their suspicions were right. An active serial killer was on the loose in London.
Young men in their 20s had been murdered in East London, and their bodies had been found in unexplained circumstances, all within a few hundred yards of each other.
The killer was a 40-year-old loner named Stephen Port. He lured 4 young men to their deaths using online dating sites and went to great lengths to cover up his crimes.
I suspect he would have gone on killing without any hesitation for as long as he could have got away with it.
Stephen Port had been unmasked as one of the world's most evil killers. It was a crime that shocked the nation and left Britain's LGBT community devastated. In 2014, 39-year-old Stephen Port killed 3 young men in Barking, East London. All the bodies had been found within yards of one another, and it was initially thought that no foul play was involved. But the discovery of a 4th victim in September 2015, 25-year-old Jack Taylor, led the police to the killer who'd poisoned his trusting victims. On the 13th of September 2015, Jack had arranged to meet a man he'd been chatting to on the gay dating mobile phone app Grindr. He was never seen alive again. It was a day that his family would never forget.
We knew that Jack hadn't come home, so we was all worried. And we was all trying to get hold of him, wasn't we, and chasing up his friends and stuff. We'd always hear from Jack. He'd always let my mum and dad know if he wasn't coming home, and he hadn't.
2 days after reporting Jack missing, the family received the news they'd been dreading.
Mum had called me to say that Jack still wasn't home. And then all of a sudden a police car pulled up outside. And then the next thing, she said that the officers were coming towards our door. And all I've heard is, "Are you Jack's mum and dad?" And obviously they said, yeah. And obviously Jack's dead. And you just heard Mum scream. Well, obviously you know what that scream is.
Jack's body had been discovered propped up against the outside wall of the graveyard of St Margaret's Church in Barking, East London. Police found drug paraphernalia, including a small bottle containing the party drug GHB. He had died from an overdose. However, Jack's family was certain that his death wasn't self-inflicted.
Jack was very anti-drugs, so that didn't make sense. You just get this gut feeling that something's not right.
The family were determined to find out the truth, and a fortnight after Jack's death, the police showed them some revealing footage.
So we found out 2 weeks later that they'd seen CCTV footage of Jack meeting a man at Barking Station, which we thought was very bizarre, like very strange. At that time in the morning as well, we just thought, well, who's this man?
The man in question was a local chef named Stephen Port. The story of this elusive killer begins over 40 years ago.
Port was born in Southend-on-Sea in February 1975, left Southend at the age of about 1, and his parents moved to Dagenham in Essex.
He seems to have come from quite an average working class background, which was, to all intents and purposes, relatively normal from the outside. He seems to be a boy who was quite quiet, he was quite awkward, he wasn't somebody who was a great conversationalist. And it's been said that when he was at school, some people thought that he was deaf because he was that detached and that disengaged from other people. So he's always been very insular and very introverted.
After taking his GCSEs, Port enrolled into art college, but had to drop out because his family couldn't afford the fees.
He had to basically choose something else, so he went on and trained to be a chef. So I think he's always got that sense of frustration and that sense of entitlement. I think he has this idea that I have this talent, I have this skill, I should be able to develop that, and I'm not able to because of other people. So I think that stays with him for quite a long time.
Aged 30, Port moved out of his family home and into a flat on Cook Street in nearby Barking, East London. One of his new neighbours was Ryan Edwards.
I first met Stephen when I moved to Barking in April 2005, and I lived in a first floor flat, and it overlooked where I would discover Stephen lived. And as a young gay man myself, I didn't know anyone gay in the local area, so it didn't take me long really to introduce myself to him. He was a very tall man, sort of a towering physical presence. And he actually walked with almost like a bit of a lumber stroke lurch. He was very much a man of few words, so when he used to talk to me, he often didn't give eye contact. He would bow his head, and he would often give 1 or 2 word answers.
And it wasn't long before Ryan started to notice some strange behaviour from his new neighbour.
I think there was something stunted about Stephen's mental development. I remember something a bit peculiar. I was going to host a party. I was just putting some rubbish out, and there was a toy truck there, and I thought Stephen will love that. And I was with a friend at the time. I said, "You can't give a grown man a toy truck." And I was like, "Yeah, but from what I knew of Stephen, I think he'd really like it." So at the party, I gave him the toy truck. And lo and behold, he was absolutely overjoyed with it. He then sat cross-legged on the floor and started pushing the toy truck up and down. He was obviously in his complete own world while the party was going on around him.
He retains quite a childlike quality to him, even as an adult. So he collects children's toys and he plays with those toys almost like he's a child. So the idea of the judgment of other people and what others would think of his behaviour really doesn't impact upon him in the same way that it does the rest of us.
Port's awkward demeanour made it difficult for him to meet men in person. He was far more comfortable with online dating.
I think Stephen Port was somebody who did lack those basic social skills. So I think he'd find social media incredibly attractive. He's able to spend time thinking about the types of things to say on his profile. And he'd have real trouble meeting people in a face-to-face situation, but the internet removes a lot of that.
This was his form of communication. He wasn't a man, for example, to go out to the pub or to a bar at night. This was a man who lived in his own fantasy, created with the help of his internet connection.
Port created several profiles across many different sites.
He claimed to have been in the military, he claimed to have graduated from Oxford University, at other times he'd claimed that he was a special needs teacher, and that's the thing about social media, it enables us to present a whole range of different identities to people, and I think what he was essentially doing here was trying on different identities, because the self that you create on social media, you can be whatever you want to be.
Stephen's rate of going through and meeting new guys was prolific. So it was quite, not unusual that it would be a new guy every day. Even on the first time he'd met them, he would then announce to me via text message normally that, I've got a new boyfriend, come around and meet my new boyfriend.
The Stephen Port that he presented to the world was somebody who looked younger than he was. He would often use pictures that were taken many years ago. He doesn't feel that the real Stephen Port is actually enough to actually get the attention of others and to have others interested in him.
It was clear that Port was attracted to younger men.
There's a really clear reason for that, because here we've got somebody who really has a lot of problems relating to people of his own age. So I think he's always going to be attracted towards people who look younger because he feels like he's more in control.
He was a kind of praying mantis figure. Quite thin, pale-faced, uncomfortable in lots of company, much happier when he was alone with young men. He had an appetite for vulnerable young men, certainly younger than 25, and he was interested in control. It's about the power. And for Port, it was all about power.
Stephen would quite often deposit the boyfriend in my company, and so I would end up getting to know these guys. And they rarely had a good word to say about Stephen. They would often say that he was mentally abusing them. He was very argumentative, very manipulative, very controlling. But what was strange really is that if Stephen was such an awful person, they were still sticking around. So again, was there some sort of control that Stephen was exhibiting to make these guys, not run for the hills?
As well as the volatile relationships, Port had become immersed in a world of drug-fueled sex parties, but his wild behaviour was beginning to spill over into his everyday life.
He led me through to the kitchen and the living room, and I was absolutely taken aback when I looked at the coffee table, and the whole circumference was filled up with a clear plastic box. And in that container were lots and lots and lots of vials of clear liquid and bags of white powder. I obviously quickly realised that this was a huge amount of drugs, so then that's when I pretty much took a step back, and that was one of the last times I actually went round Stephen's flat.
There was nobody there putting the brakes on his behaviour. There was nobody holding him accountable for what he was doing. So when one relationship ended, another one would begin, and it would be a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more violent than the one before.
Stephen Port's violent behaviour would only intensify as his appetite for young men and drug abuse would spiral out of control. He was living alone in a flat in Barking, East London, and his internet search history was becoming more and more perverse.
He was trying to satisfy his desire by searching the internet, which a lot of people do. The difference is that some of them get satisfied only by looking at pictures and watching films on the internet, and some of them, that will not be enough. They will want to move on, which unfortunately was his case.
And it wasn't long before he would act upon these depraved urges. On the 15th of June 2014, Port contacted 23-year-old fashion student Anthony Walgate through a male escorting site. He offered to pay Anthony £800 to spend the night, and they agreed to meet 2 days later on the 17th of June. As a precaution, Anthony texted friends about the arrangement. But just 2 days later, he was found dead outside Port's flat. The police received an anonymous 999 call from Stephen Port himself.
Emergency ambulance. What's the address of the emergency?
Cook Street. There's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside.
Outside of which number?
4758, I think.
What area?
Barking.
47 Cook Street.
Yeah. It looks like he's collapsed or had a seizure or something. He's always just drunk.
When the paramedics arrived, Anthony was found slumped against a wall with his bag beside him. Inside was a bottle of the date rape drug GHB. He had died of an overdose.
Walgate had turned up at his flat, and there is no doubt that he was rapidly subdued with the use of GHB and other drugs. Now, there is an argument which suggests that perhaps something went just a bit too far as far as Walgate was concerned, and that the drugs had too great an effect. It could be that he got the dose wrong. It could be that this was something new that he was trying out. We don't know. But what we do know is that Anthony Walgate died at Port's hands.
Port told the police that he found Anthony outside his flat on his way home from work. His death wasn't treated as suspicious. It was devastating news for his mother, Sarah Sack.
When I had this made, it says on it, Anthony, it's all about me. Because to me, that summed up Anthony. It was always all about him. I've always said to friends and family now, you need to get pictures. You never know what's going to happen. The last time I had any contact with Anthony was the 15th of June, because it was my birthday on the 17th of June. And I said to him, I'm going on holiday, I'll see you when I get back, that sort of thing. And of course, I never did get to see him again. It was the Sunday before I was due to come home, and I turned my phone back on. There was 50 odd missed calls, there was texts, there was hundreds and hundreds of messages coming through that you need to ring home, something's happened. So I called my son, and he had to tell me over the phone that Anthony had been found dead. To be honest, it was just a bit of a blur. It was so fast, and I don't even really remember much about it. I'm just in shock that it could happen. You know, you really don't expect this to happen. You go on holiday for your birthday, etc., and then find out one of your children are dead.
Sarah approached the police for some more information about her son's death.
Anthony was found dead in the street. So I said, well, you know, was he stabbed, shot, beaten? What? No, nothing. There was not a mark on him, and we don't know why. They'd done a post-mortem the Friday before and nothing had come up and shown. So I said to him straight away then, something's not right.
Anthony's friends told detectives that he'd arranged to meet up with the man on the night he disappeared. The police soon realised it was the same person who dialed 999, Stephen Port. On the 26th of June, he was arrested, his laptop was seized and his DNA taken.
It starts to unravel, and the police do start to put the pieces together and figure out that he is connected to this in some way. So Port's story changes, he continues to lie, and I think he's sailing quite close to the wind with this particular case.
Port told detectives that Anthony had taken drugs and fallen asleep. He said he then left the 23-year-old in the flat, and when he got back from work later that day, Anthony was asleep. The following morning, he found Anthony dead. Port said he panicked and carried the body outside before calling the police. The investigators believed him.
And I think he feels quite relieved when he gets away with it, because I think that once he was in the police station, once he was being questioned, he probably did think the game was up, and I don't think he could quite believe his luck when he walked away from it.
The police had missed an opportunity to capture Port. He would go on to kill 3 more young men. Human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell believes the following deaths could have been avoided if communications between the authorities and the public were improved.
One of the problems the gay community and the police face is that many crimes linked to dating apps are not reported. There is, in general, a very significant underreporting of homophobic hate crime, but there appears to be a particular underreporting of crimes linked to Grindr and other social dating apps.
On June the 26th, the police charged Port with perverting the course of justice and set a trial date for March 2015. He was immediately released on bail.
Astonishingly, they did no further serious probing of Stephen Port, including his searches on his laptop and including his phone records. Those searches might have much earlier on shone a spotlight on Stephen Port as a potential killer.
In fact, Port was ready to strike again. Just 2 months after Anthony Walgate's death, he was back on the dating mobile phone app Grindr and began messaging 22-year-old Slovakian Gabriel Kavari. On the 23rd of August, Gabriel moved into Port's flat.
He seemed like a very nice guy, very articulate, intelligent, well-spoken, who had a passion for art, and he was very much an aspiring artist.
Ryan invited the couple into his flat for a coffee.
So Stephen brings him over, and then when Stephen goes to the toilet, Gabriel then says to me in sort of hushed tones, "Ryan, Stephen is not the man you think he is. He is a bad man." And it didn't take me long to realise that Gabriel was not happy living with Stephen.
I think Stephen Port would have really had a bit of a shock with Gabriel Kavari. I think he would have felt incredibly threatened by him, because here is a young man who is everything that Stephen Port isn't. He's somebody who's ambitious, he's somebody who's going somewhere in his life, and I think Port will feel incredibly resentful towards him.
He was strikingly different to the guys that Stephen would normally hang around with. And so for that reason, he piqued my interest really. And so I thought, oh, well, actually, I'm going to keep in touch with Gabriel. And so we then started to swap some messages on social media.
But all of a sudden, the messages stopped.
And so I raised this with Stephen about, why has Gabriel stopped, communicating? Where is he? And then Stephen told me that I'm not sure where Gabriel's gone. He's just disappeared. And then it changed after a few days to Gabriel's met up and gone out with an army guy, and then changed again to I'm worried about Gabriel's safety. And then it was about a week after that I got this really eerie message from Stephen, a long message saying, I've got some really sad news, but I've heard from Gabriel's friend that he's gone back home and he picked up a mysterious illness and has died.
On the 28th of August 2014, just 5 days after he moved into Port's flat on Cook Street, Gabriel Cavari was found dead. A woman walking her dog in the graveyard of St. Margaret's Church found his lifeless body propped up against a wall.
It was an awful realization. He was, he seemed like such a nice, pure person. And coming to this country and, what a way to be welcomed by this country to end in such awful circumstances.
It appeared that he, Gabriel Cavari, had died of a drugs overdose. But the shocking reality was that Stephen Port had drugged and killed him, just as he did with Anthony Walgate 2 months previously. Port had now killed 2 men. His urges were only intensifying, and in less than a month, another man would be dead. The police had arrested and charged him on perverting the course of justice after he failed to correctly report the death of his first victim, Anthony Walgate. But they had no idea that Port was actually a killer.
I think the key thing about Stephen Port getting away with murder is there's not that connection between actions and consequences. He can take somebody's life and nothing happens, and he continues to get what he wants. He continues to be able to assault his victims and to dispose of their bodies in the most obvious way. And I think he does feel incredibly untouchable at this point in time.
While still out on bail, Port killed for a 3rd time. On the 18th of September, he contacted 21-year-old chef Daniel Whitworth through an online gay dating site, and the two decided to meet. 2 days later, Daniel was found dead. His body was discovered in the graveyard at St. Margaret's Church, in the same spot as Port's second victim, Gabriel Cavari, extraordinarily by the exact same dog walker.
I've come through and I've seen somebody else, a different boy, sitting in exactly the same position, leaning up against the exact same wall, and I'm thinking to myself, please God, no, please not another one.
On the news of his death, Daniel's stepmother, Mandy Pearson, was completely heartbroken.
Well, this is my memory box for Daniel. It's got a lot of things in there, just things that I'm still finding. Anything that I come across that reminds me of him even, I'll just put it in there. Adam, Daniel's father, really did adore his boy. You know, he was going places. And Daniel's dad was very proud of that, extremely proud of that.
But on the 20th of September 2014, the family's lives changed forever.
I opened the door to the police, who immediately removed their hats. And that was when time stood still for me, really. I thought they're not here with good news. They just are not here with good news. I really don't recall what I actually said next. I cried. And so then one of us asked how, and they did lower their heads and say, well, it looks like he took his own life.
Just like his other 2 victims, Port had poisoned Daniel with a toxic amount of GHB. He then placed his body in the same place as Gabriel Cavari's. In a bizarre move to try and evade capture, Port then wrote and planted a fake suicide note, which claimed that Daniel had killed Gabriel just 3 weeks earlier.
Adam and I actually managed to see the letter in its entirety. There wasn't a thing in that letter that spoke to us about Daniel. There were no names. He was talking in the wrong kind of context. It was like, I didn't tell my family where I was going. Well, you wouldn't say that to your family. And at that point, I said, who is this addressed to? Because it's not addressed to us, is it?
Something else in the letter aroused Mandy's suspicions.
There was, don't blame the guy I was with last night, it was only sex. And obviously the first question then was who? Who is this man?
The fact that Stephen Port wrote the fake suicide note, it does seem completely incredible, doesn't it? But by this point, he thinks he's invincible because he's gotten away with murder before. And he sailed quite close to the wind that time, so he wants to be careful that he doesn't get caught again. And I think because he is quite childlike, because he is quite immature, he doesn't see how absolutely incredulous this should appear to be.
News of the death of the 3 young gay men began to spread through the LGBT community. A friend of Gabriel Cavari, John Pape, approached human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell.
I was immediately shocked that the police had issued no public appeal and there seemed to be no ongoing investigation. That prompted me to ask John Pape to contact Gallup, the police monitoring group, and Pink News, the main gay website. I asked him to try and get them to press the police for answers. Both Gallup and Pink News did go to the police, but were reassured that there was nothing suspicious or unusual about the deaths.
Port had managed to evade capture for a 3rd time. However, his killing spree was about to be temporarily halted. On the 23rd of March 2015, Port pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice during the investigation into Anthony Walgate's death. He was sentenced to 8 months in prison, but served just over 2 of them. On the 4th of June, he was released. Port was free to kill again.
I never really understood the circumstances at the time of why he was in prison, but I did ask him, obviously, when he got out via text message, what was that all about? Why were you in prison for a couple of months? And eerily, he said to me on text message, it was a 90-second mistake, Ryan, that cost me several months of my life in prison. And I never really understood what he meant by that. But looking back, it's kind of a bit chilling.
Just 3 months after being released from prison, Port struck again. On the 14th of September 2015, almost exactly a year since the last murder, the body of 25-year-old forklift driver Jack Taylor was found in the same churchyard as Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Whitworth.
I think the graveyard became a kind of favourite disposal site for him because it served 2 purposes. It got the bodies out of the way, but it also created a bit of a narrative for anybody coming across these individuals. This graveyard was a place where often homeless people who were down on their luck would hang out, and that creates a little bit of a story in the beginning when the bodies are discovered.
Jack's family were devastated but began to question the circumstances surrounding his death.
We know Jack, obviously, and Jack's very particular. He didn't like dark, didn't like it at all, first off. Second of all, Jack wouldn't just walk in a park area, let alone a cemetery or anything like that. He wouldn't.
And it doesn't make sense to leave the house at like 2:30 in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning to go and sit over a park. That doesn't even make sense.
He was just an absolute joy to be around.
Loving, caring, always there for other people.
Determined to find out more, the Taylor family asked to see the CCTV footage of Jack's last known movements. It showed him walking with a tall, blonde stranger. In October 2015, the police put an appeal to the public, and it was soon confirmed that the mysterious man in the footage was Stephen Port.
In the end, it was the determination of Jack Taylor's family to pursue the police that eventually led them to take Port seriously. I believe had that not happened, Port might well have got away, or got away with it.
On the 15th of October 2015, Port was arrested on suspicion of causing the deaths of all 4 young men. The police had a serial killer in custody, one that had previously slipped through their fingers. The police had originally believed that the deaths were all self-administered drug overdoses. They were determined to find out the truth. Detectives searching Port's flat had seized his laptop and mobile phone. They interrogated him about his search history, which included boy drug rapes. His hard drive also contained videos of him having sex with unconscious men. Under questioning, Port admitted that he had met his 3rd victim, Daniel Whitworth, at a sex party, but he knew nothing about his death. He also claimed that he hadn't administered drugs to anyone and denied killing the 4 young men.
He's quite well spoken, he appears to be quite reserved. I think what we're seeing here is a bit of a veneer that he's crafted to present to the rest of the world. You wouldn't think that this is the type of person who could do this kind of thing.
But the police weren't falling for it. They could link Port to all 4 of his victims. On the 18th of October 2015, he was arrested and charged with the murders of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari, Jack Taylor and Daniel Whitworth.
I was told via the phone. The liaison officer that we had previously, he phoned with the opening line of, "Don't build your hopes up, but we've arrested someone." And I said, right, this is just too huge for me to deal with, and I need to speak to Adam, so I'm going to let you go. To try and explain to you how that was, the surreal situation that we were in, also included the emotion of comfort, because we thought he wasn't in that dark place. He didn't take his own life. He wasn't angry with any of us. He wasn't upset. He wasn't in this awful place where we couldn't reach him, where he didn't come to us, and for that split second, you're comforted by the fact that your son has been murdered, which is bizarre. It's bizarre. We had a sigh of relief, and that was quickly followed by anger. It was just incredible. We didn't know where to go from there.
The day I actually got the phone call to say that they'd arrested him for the 4 murders, I didn't even feel glad. I felt like I'd been shot, to be quite honest. Straight pain to my chest and I just burst into tears. It was awful.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
It's like, there's one thing putting everything together, what me and Jen did, and believing that we are right, that somebody has done something to Jack. But when you're told it and it becomes official, it's awful. It is awful.
And it wasn't long before the story of the shocking murders hit the headlines.
A friend of mine sent me a link to a news article online, and I clicked on it, and kind of like an icy dread sort of went over my body, and I sat bolt upright in bed, where it was like, local man Stephen Port arrested on suspicion of 4 murders, and then I looked through the names and I saw Gabriel being one of them.
As the story broke, more men came forward claiming that they too had been drugged and sexually assaulted at Port's flat after meeting him online.
I think there was a very clear reason why Port chose to use GHB. I think that he was tapping into the stigma and the lifestyle, or the perceived lifestyle of young gay men. I think he realised that if this does go too far, if somebody does have too much and they don't survive, then I'm going to be able to present it in a particular way that people aren't going to ask questions.
I was very surprised what an ugly person he is, and I think the only way he could get these young, attractive boys was to drug them, because nobody would have looked at him twice. He was a very ugly person, inside and out. A sad, lonely, bald old man. And I don't think he's very bright, and he literally thought he was God, that he could just get away with it.
In July 2016, Port was charged with the rape of 8 more victims between 2011 and October 2015, the month he was finally captured.
The single most shocking thing about Stephen Port is that a monster can prey on innocent young men in absolutely plain sight in the East End of London in 2015, and no one seems to pay any attention at all.
When his trial began at the Old Bailey on the 5th of October 2016, Port was faced with 29 separate charges of rape, sexual assault, administering a substance with intent, and with murder. The 41-year-old pleaded not guilty. This meant the family of the victims would have to face the man responsible for killing their loved ones.
And we walked in. I knew I was going to look at him. He was up there behind glass, and he was looking down when we came in. I wanted Stephen Port to give me some eye contact. That was a need in me. I was just looking for any small sign of human emotion from this thing with 2 arms and 2 legs that was apparently human. I wanted something from his eyes, and I never got that. I didn't get that.
For 4 weeks, the jury were presented with evidence to prove that Port was a killer. Investigators had found his DNA on Gabriel Cavari's sunglasses and Daniel Whitworth's clothes. Handwriting experts also confirmed that Daniel didn't write the suicide note found alongside him. Ryan Edwards testified against his former neighbour during the trial.
So I did my evidence, and as I was leaving, I couldn't help but kind of quickly glance at Stephen, because I had to walk quite near past him as I was leaving. And chillingly, he kind of gave me a crooked half smile. Almost like a mischievous grin that a child would give when they've been caught out doing something they know is wrong. And that was eerie.
On the 23rd of November 2016, the jury convicted Port of a total of 22 offences against 11 men, including the 4 murders, 4 rapes, 4 sexual assaults, and 10 counts of administering a substance with intent. Mr. Justice Openshaw sentenced Stephen Port to a whole life tariff. He was immediately sent to Belmarsh prison. He will never be released. Justice had finally been served.
That sick, twisted scumbag will never be able to hurt or destroy anyone else's family or life. Jack can finally rest in peace. We will always be completely heartbroken as a family.
Since Port's incarceration, police are re-examining as many as 58 unexplained deaths involving the drug GHB.
There are almost certainly many, many more young men who were assaulted one way or another by Stephen Port. The only thing we can be grateful for is that Port was eventually stopped. He was, in every respect, a most terrifying figure.
In October 2016, the Metropolitan Police referred themselves to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. The IPCC launched an independent investigation into 17 officers who handled the response to the 4 deaths. The investigation continues. Despite the internal police review and Port's incarceration, nothing can bring back the 4 young men that lost their lives.
We've got to make room for this to run parallel with a life that... I'm not going to use the word destroyed, because he's taken our boy and he's not taken any more. We do reminisce. We do reminisce about Daniel and, you know, some of the things we did when we were out and about, and you know, that's becoming easier to do.
No, it still isn't getting easier over time. He used to say, he from being early teens, he called me Cesar. He never called me Mum. And he always used to say, you wait, Cesar, one day I'll be famous, everybody will be talking about me. Which they are, but obviously for the wrong reasons.
We haven't had time to grieve, have we?
No. We still have days now where we'll just get up as what we call a normal day, and we don't feel like anything's normal anymore, do we? But a normal day, and all of a sudden you sit there and you think, oh my God, like...
He's not here.
Jack's not here, and then you have another day where you actually think, Jack was murdered. Watching your mum and dad every day, every single day.
Break down and there's nothing you can do about it.
Because, you know, like everybody in the world, if your mum and dad are upset or, you know, something's wrong, you try and fix it. And there's nothing we can do. And that is hard, very hard. You know, watching the fact that they fell apart, they've aged. You know, people we've always known are not the same people anymore. That is hard. It's hard for all of us, ain't it?
Yeah.
Stephen Port affected the lives of so many people, not just those he killed and those he raped, but also all of their friends, family, and the entire LGBT community as a whole. He murdered his victims for his own sexual gratification, and it's a tragedy that he was able to get away with it for so long. When he was finally captured, his horrific crimes were brought to light. But now we should forget the name Stephen Port and celebrate the memory of Anthony, Gabriel, Daniel, and Jack instead.